Our government isn't malfeasant. We know what malfeasant governments are. They're the ones that put political prisoners in jail and take their own citizens, and cordon them off in inhumane circumstance. Our government may not be good enough for the American people, but undermining it isn't enough. And telling lies about the American people, it's my experience that our citizens and our residents are disproportionately good. And when you tell the American people that those things are untrue, not only do you undermine our belief in ourselves, which is the most important thing that we have, but you create a playground for those who would advance their interests at the expense of ours.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. Spreading the lie that there is malfeasance in our government, that some mysterious, shadowy deep state is out to get Donald Trump and his supporters poses a grave threat to U.S. national security and, by extension, the American people. We heard that from former Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Sue Gordon. She talked about it on this program last week, not because it's some abstract theory out there, but because it is a message that Trump and some of his most extreme allies have been pushing onto the American people repeatedly and for years now. Especially one person named Kash Patel, who, according to reporting from our colleague Vaughn Hilliard, is currently under consideration to be the director of the CIA or the FBI in Donald Trump's second term. It's an interesting development, as we just learned moments ago, that the current director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, also appointed by Donald Trump, as well as people on the Trump team, are planning for the possibility that Trump will replace his first pick to be FBI director during his first term, Christopher Wray. Wray has not finished serving out his 10-year term, and that is according to 3 people familiar with this matter. But to refresh your memory for a minute on the individual named Kash Patel. He's someone Trump wanted to install as deputy director of the CIA at the end of his first term as president. But Gina Haspel, who was running the CIA at the time, said she would quit if he did that. Kash Patel has since written a book called, quote, Government Gangsters, which, as ABC News reports, calls for a, quote, comprehensive house cleaning at the Justice Department and an eradication of government tyranny within the FBI by firing the top ranks and prosecuting to the fullest extent of the law anyone who in any way abused their authority for political ends. And he has said this in the past.
The one thing we learned in the Trump administration the first go around is we got to put in all America patriots top to bottom. And we got them for law enforcement. We got them for intel collection. We got them for offensive operations. We got them for DOD, CIA, everywhere. And the one thing we will do that they never will do is we will follow the facts and the law and go to courts of law and correct these justices and lawyers who have been prosecuting these cases based on politics and actually issuing them as lawfare. We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice.
They're going to go get the people who lied about the results of the election. We hope he means in 2020, and incited people to commit crimes at the U.S. Capitol. We hope he does that. Anyone that lied about the results of the 2020 election and inspired their own people to carry out crimes and chant "Hang Mike Pence," those people should meet the fate that Kash Patel describes there in that interview. Now, as concerning as Kash Patel's appointment was to Gina Haspel 4 years ago, and as concerning as the potential for that happening now is, there are more and different worries around what the intelligence community will look like under Donald Trump. NBC News is reporting on the mounting concerns that Trump will politicize and weaponize the U.S. spy agencies, claims he has made very publicly in the past. Quote, lawmakers, former intelligence officers, and Western officials worry that Trump and a group of loyalists could reshape the makeup and mission of the nation's intelligence apparatus. Officers could be pressured to skew their findings to suit the White House's political agenda. Allies might scale back information sharing due to Trump's cavalier approach to secrecy. And in a worst-case scenario, the spy agencies could be converted into tools of retribution against domestic political opponents, the former officers and others say. Meanwhile, the president-elect has been fielding calls from foreign leaders. The Washington Post is reporting that Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday, their first call since Trump's win, according to what the Washington Post called, quote, several people familiar with the matter. Russia is denying that that call took place, and Trump's team tells NBC News this, quote, we do not comment on private calls between President Trump and other world leaders. So there's that. The New York Times is also reporting that South Korea is worried Trump and Kim Jong-un will soon be exchanging what Trump called love letters once again, a situation that could put the safety of our ally South Korea at risk. All of this is where we start the hour with former chief of staff at the CIA and at the Department of Defense. Our dear friend Jeremy Bash is here. Jeremy, where do you want to start? Should we start with Kash Patel and his future atop either the FBI or the CIA? What would you think?
Hey, Nicole. So first, I want to start by saying, as you've said, today's Veterans Day, and today's a day when we honor the service and sacrifice of those who have served our nation in uniform. It's also a good moment to remember the people who have paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. And I say that, and I start there, because I want people to know that the people who wear the uniform of our country, the people who serve in our intelligence agencies, the people who are the career foreign service diplomats serving our departments and agencies, they're not part of any political party. They're not part of a regime. They don't have a loyalty oath to a person or to an agenda. They're not even part of a loyal opposition. They are completely nonpartisan, and that's the way we want it to be. And I think the only thing I would maybe label all of those people, and I put myself proudly in this camp, is we're institutionalists. We truly believe that the institutions of our government, when deployed and used in a nonpartisan, nonpolitical way, serve the best interests of all Americans. And I actually think, Nicole, as you were assessing at the top of this show, how the Senate will consider the nominations of certain national security professionals, I actually believe that there are a lot of Republican senators, and I put John Thune, John Cornyn, Mitch McConnell, incoming Senator Dave McCormick, in that institutional bucket as well. I believe that they will want to see people leading these departments and agencies who will speak truth to power, who will be faithful to the ideal of nonpartisanship. Yes, we need to have civilian control of the military. That's an important principle. We should unpack what that means in the context of a Trump administration. But I want people to know that the good people at CIA, the good people in the Director of National Intelligence, the good people at the Pentagon are not some deep state. They're not going to pursue some political agenda. They just don't have it in their DNA. They don't do it. And they're going to be really working for the interests of all Americans.
Jeremy, 8 years ago, I would have left it unremarked what you just said about Mitch McConnell and Mr. McCormick, and I don't know who else you lumped in there, John Thune. But I think we're too late into the Trump story to hope for people who know better to do better. I mean, the story we led with was about recess appointments because Donald Trump has such a massive political mandate going to Washington. He doesn't need them. So he's using them for a different reason. And I think we both know what the different reason is, right? I mean, are you really pinning the preservation of these institutions you and I both revere on Mitch McConnell and John Thune growing a spine?
Well, Nicole, do we have a choice? I mean, that's the point, which is part of being institutionalist means you believe and subscribe to the view of separation of powers in our constitutional system. And you kind of hit this at the top of the show. We're going to be entering a period in which Donald Trump not only controls the entire executive branch, his party will control the Senate, probably the House, and a significant majority of the U.S. Supreme Court. So anybody who has taken civics understands that when you control all three branches of government with a political party, it's much more challenging to have checks and balances. And so as difficult as it is to contemplate this at this moment, Nicole, I think we have to rely on Republicans, Republican elected officials, Supreme Court justices, and people inside government and outside government who are willing to continue to have checks and balances, to continue to hold the executive branch accountable. If there's an unlawful order given to the United States military, I expect, and I think it will be the case, that uniformed military will not carry out unlawful orders. If these people try to politicize the work of the Central Intelligence Agency, I know the people who work at the Central Intelligence Agency, they will not allow their work to be politicized. They will speak the truth, and the truth will set them free. That's emblazoned on the wall of the original headquarters building at Langley. There's a kind of a mode of operating, a view, a loyalty to the Constitution that honestly, is bigger than any other idea of who's in power, who's your commander-in-chief, who's calling the shots in the executive branch. And I think we can have faith in people who believe in these institutions.